Managing subscriptions is a professional area that is becoming increasingly important for school librarians. Today, Rob and Sal are looking not only at the issues raised by managing subscriptions, but also at getting good value for money and where to find the best freebies. Rob.
Andy, thank you very much, everyone. It's lovely to see you here. So I spoke about subscriptions to a Phobasia meeting about 2 years ago, and that was a shorter presentation. And I just thought I'd revisit it here. Now, in my head, when I think about subscriptions, my feeling is that we're living in a world of temporary ownership. Firstly, talking about our everyday lives, not specifically libraries. The migration of huge chunks of our lives to the online world has had so many impacts. I mean, we used to buy and own music on records and CDs, and this one example makes an important point as we consider consuming and accessing content. As in our current existence, the providers of music content have made the only feasible way forward, assuming you want to be able to listen without interruption from advertising, is to subscribe to Spotify or Apple Music. But here again, like with our library subscriptions, making the right choice for yourself is not 100% straightforward. If you're an Amazon Prime member, then maybe that might be better for you. Or if you're an audiophile, then you might feel the need for a higher fidelity stream from the likes of Quobuzz. The cost management impact and complexity of accessing the content we want pushes us to tough personal decisions. And this effect is massively magnified for those of us who lead school libraries. But where we have to manage the budget available to maximize the bang for our buck as we are navigating to purchase content for our users to access, we've got complicated thoughts. And just like the example I gave before with personal consumption of music, this will now involve many, many subscriptions. Next slide, please, Andy. So I'd like to move on to putting school library subscriptions into a historical perspective. I apologize to primary library colleagues with us here today, as it sounds like I'm more focused on secondary content. But bear with me, as I think these thoughts are directly transferable to the primary school needs, albeit that they are different content. I think that reviewing the massive content provision changes that has taken place since I joined my current school library in 2010 will provide us with a good platform for further discussion after Sally and I open the discussion to you all in about 20 minutes' time. So for me, I became a teacher librarian, having been a physics teacher, back in 2004. And at that point, the online effect for library provision was minimal. And even as I started my current position in 2010 at the Alice Smith School, we had virtually no online subscriptions. At that time, we had a handful of hard copy newspapers, about a dozen hard copy magazines, and hard copy professional subscriptions like Times Educational Supplement and the Association for Science Education. Whereas now, through online subscriptions, our newspaper and magazine provision has been revolutionized by the likes of Press Reader and The Day, with Press Reader providing thousands of titles. We have online access to wider reading magazines like The Economist, New Scientist, and Scientific American. And with the subscription mechanism, these now have the superpowers that we all love of access from anywhere, multiple simultaneous access, and very often access to the publication's archive. And also, when we're thinking about what subscriptions have replaced, needless to say, our quick reference collection has all but disappeared as patrons default to online for this type of provision. I mean, for us, we have paid online subscription to Encyclopedia Britannica, and with the likes of the Oxford English Dictionary being mostly free online, that has taken away the need for our dictionaries. If I also think about music and video subscriptions, and this is inevitably our CD and DVD collections have now disappeared. But then I ask, what has replaced them? And this is where I think that we as a school have tripped ourselves up in some ways. We've dipped our toe in the water with ClickView, but we subsequently stopped that expensive subscription as staff were difficult to lure away from YouTube and similar for that type of content. We had a great DVD collection of movies, and that's somewhere we're now weaker than we were back in 2010, as we've not found the budget for the likes of Canopy. I haven't got time to explain. I think most of you will know those types of things. However, one area where we're much stronger again as a result of subscriptions is with academic databases. So for those who are seeking serious research support, like EPQ students or EE students, and for that we now have JSTOR, Gale Academic OneFile, and EBSCO's Science Reference Center. Next slide, please, Andy.
Before we go on to the next slide, Rob, I just want to take a quick poll there, because
yes.
We've been talking about what's happening at Alice Smith, but we'd like to know exactly what everyone out there is subscribing to and how important polls are to your school. So here we go. What's the importance of subscriptions to your school? How important are subscriptions in your library? Are they a small component of your provision? They're a significant component, or are they the most important component of your provision in the library? If you can just click one of those, that would be great. At the moment, significant and most important. These are coming on. So the picture that we're getting is overwhelmingly, they seem to be important in your library. There's one there that's only a small component of the provision. Just give you another second, and it looks as though, Rob and Sal, subscriptions are increasingly important for the members of this webinar. So there we go. We've got 14% of you, just a small component, 71%. They're a significant part of your provision, and just 14%, they're the most important part of your provision. So interesting stuff. Thanks very much indeed. And we're going to just close that one down. And Rob, I'm just going to move you on to the next slide. Here you go.
Yeah, and in terms of that poll, perhaps we should have reworded that so that it was split between fiction and non-fiction, because when I answered that question myself, I chose the middle option, but it would have been a different answer if I was responding for fiction or non-fiction.
Interesting, yeah.
Good to think anyway. Okay, so onward to reflect on types of subscription, and that most of us will be supporting in libraries. And in that regard, there is often confusion in schools as to who manages the school subscriptions. In my school, we try to divide responsibility so that library manages all subscriptions that are information provision, or ebooks, audiobooks, or e-textbooks. And that's because our library manages all textbooks for the school. But those subscriptions that are teaching and learning tools or school management tools, the subscription management falls as the responsibility of others. So if I think about what subscription categories do we have under the library's management, and perhaps I should say that wherever we subscribe to anything, we try to make all subscriptions accessible to the whole community. So wherever possible, that includes parents having access. So onto those categories. And I don't know whether I'm going to unpack too many things that we do at my school, but I thought I would just quickly scroll through. So in terms of newspapers and magazines, we've got Press Reader, we've got The Day, and we've got Financial Times. And actually, we don't subscribe to Financial Times because that's provided free of charge if you apply, and that's worth knowing about if you don't. We still have two types of hard copy magazines in our library. We have ad hoc purchased rest and relaxation magazines that are for patrons to pick up and read in our library living room area. And we also have hard copy magazines in support of teaching. And those ones would, I won't mention them all, but the likes of Economist, New Scientist, the main Scientific American magazine. Oh, and also Sight and Sound we have. Encyclopedias, now that's an interesting one. And we provide Encyclopedia Britannica as our authoritative encyclopedia. But to be honest, and perhaps I should be embarrassed to say this, but to be honest, it's not well used by the secondary students, but it does see better traffic from our primary campus. Then our databases. And you know, our databases, as opposed to encyclopedias, really do get good use. And for that, we subscribe to JSTOR, Gale, the university database, Gale Academic OneFile, and the EBSCO Host Science Reference Center. And although they're not subscriptions, on our library website, we are also promoting what we think are the most useful open access databases in association with that. But that's free stuff. And we can talk about free stuff, including open access databases, in our discussion once Sal and myself have finished presenting. If I think about those subscriptions which departments demand in support of their subjects, these ones, because we deem them to be information provision, we do the management. So for English and Media Studies, we have e-magazine and Media Magazine from the English and Media Centre. And also for English literature, we have Lit Charts and Lit Drive. And those, the English teachers absolutely love if you haven't heard of them. For history, we subscribe to Active History and Historical Association. These things are all accessible by students and parents. For drama, we have Drama Online and Digital Theatre Plus. Now, just a couple of minutes ago, I confessed to weakness in terms of video and lecture, video content, but we do have Masolit lectures, and we find them to be fantastic support for A-level teaching. But we don't have them all because due to budgetary constraints, we only have access to English literature, history, and sociology. And they were lucky to be bidding first because now the other departments, biology, chemistry, physics, economics, geography and maths and media studies are all going, why don't we have it? And at the moment, I just have to say, we don't have the budget to add that at the moment. And I don't know whether it's really a subscription or not, but Sally and myself are including ebooks and audiobooks to an extent in this discussion. And in a few minutes' time, Sally is going to talk about this in more detail. For us at Alice Smith School, we're using two different ebook platforms. Our primary library content is delivered through Wheeler's e-platform, where our chosen model is an annual platform fee and content purchased title by title. And our secondary content is delivered through BorrowBox, where we pay quite a modest annual platform fee for hosting. But when it comes to BorrowBox, we have quite a complex setup, and I did want to unpack that for you. We purchase ebooks copy by copy as single user licenses. So for popular titles, we purchase multiple copies. And when it comes to buying ebooks, you'll be aware that many are sold with 2 to 8 year licenses. And for me, I find the 2-year licenses a challenge from a value for money perspective. And I only purchase popular titles, ebook titles, with 2-year licenses. I also think that I'm seeing less ebooks sold with in perpetuity license and more of them defaulting to limited term licenses, which is interesting and troublesome. Now, audiobooks for me are a whole different thing, because audiobooks are super expensive. They're about, I don't know what you're finding in your schools, but for us, I think buying an audiobook is about $70-ish US on average per title. And for us, that means that having a collection with sufficient critical mass is a challenge. And I think we've been quite creative on that front, because to overcome this, our school has formed a consortium with three other schools to have a shared borrow box collection of audiobooks. Now, we started that consortium in 2019, and it really has been successful, as we now have about 1,200 audiobooks shared between us. And that's, if you were to calculate the cost, that would be in excess of $80,000 US. And that demonstrates the benefit of consortium, as there's no way we could have a collection like that we'd have a collection like that working independently without the consortium power. We also have some professional subscriptions that are not accessible to students or parents. So onto our professional subscriptions, we have a section of our library website that is only accessible by teachers, specifically for the purpose of giving them access to our professional subscriptions. The types of professional subscriptions we're providing, and I will rattle through them. We've got some UK professional associations like PSHE Association, National Association for Teaching English, National Subject Association for EAL, Mathematical Association, Association for Science Education, CLIAPS for all that safety stuff in science and DT, Society of Biology, Institute of Physics. We belong to the Design and Technology Association. We've got an additional professional teaching drama subscription, Geographical Association. There's so many. So Historical Association, School History, British Sociological Association. But on top of all of those ones that are driven by subjects asking for specific subscriptions for their subject, we then, in addition, have the school leadership driven subscriptions, which are like the Chartered College, National College, and National Safety Online, and TES Develop. That was a bit rattling, sorry. Next slide, please, Andy.
Well, again, Rob, this is fascinating because there are so many different types of subscription, professional for the teachers, a whole range of stuff for the kids. And one of the most important things that a library for me as a former principal was that I knew that people could go into the library and get up-to-date news and news subscriptions. And of course, subscriptions has revolutionized access to news. And what I've been learning from you guys and from librarians in general is that there are different ways of getting access to news subscriptions, which can be good value for money or mount up to quite a lot of money. So what we'd like to do before you move on, Rob, is just to see how people get access to their library news subscriptions. So I'm going to put that up now. And how, if at all, do you subscribe to news subscriptions? So the first choice, you don't have any news subscriptions. The second choice, you subscribe to individual news sources one by one. I would suppose The Economist, the Daily Telegraph, or New Straits Times, whatever. Or there is these consolidated news subscriptions like Press Reader. Rob, just tell me a little bit more about Press Reader and what that is, so that if people haven't heard of it, that they might think about it.
So Press Reader is actually our most successful and it's the most used subscription we have. And it depends whether you think it's good value for money in the sense of I guess the size of your budgets. I mean, we're a school of about 1,600 students. Our total subscription fee to Press Readers about $3,200, something like that. But it's amazing. So when we go into Press Reader, we go in with Google authentication, so it does that type of thing. And once you get in, the filters and the reading platform is absolutely super sweet and beautiful. And you have access to so many things. I can't remember now. If you look at the publications from the UK, there are over 7,000 subscriptions in total. But if you look at like even just the UK, I think there are probably about 700 different publications, and it's so good for in so many different ways. But just imagine it as a language teacher. You can get in there and you can get publications in Mandarin, for example.
It really is fascinating that this is possible, and something to be considered. And looking at the poll there, it looks as though there was a spread of results that some schools don't have subscriptions of this sort. Some have a mixture of consolidated press access, like Press Reader, and some just take out one or the other. So that's worth following up and worth talking to each other about. Interesting. So I'm going to go on to the next slide now and looking at electronic resources and user engagement. Back to you again, Rob. Thank you.
Yes. So thinking about how subscriptions have changed user engagement with the library. I mean, our school library users primarily still default to hard copy fiction. So whilst we consider ebooks and our ebook and audiobook collections to be key components of our collection, I would say that they're still niche. In terms of everything, and I mean all the library provision, we offer so much more than we did 10 years ago, and I imagine that's true for all of you. And not only that, not only do we offer so much more, it's so much more up to date as a result of the electronic world. But that having been said, it is so definitely so much more difficult to navigate. And that, I think, emphasizes the key importance of the library website. Because unlike physical resources, it's easy for electronic sources to be forgotten or to not get used due to log-on barriers. And thus, one of the biggest challenges is keeping them on everyone's radar and making log-on as easy as possible. Now, for us, our library website is the key to success on this front. We have rebuilt and massively simplified our library website and have consolidated log-on pages for students and for one page for student access and one page for professional resources. And we simplify engagement as much as possible by working with our subscription providers to facilitate auto-authenticating log-on with Google. I mean, we use Google, but there are many ways of providing single sign-on. And then I ask, does the transition to online make the library more or less relevant? For sure, the library is a very different beast these days. And albeit that we have less physical resources than we used to, I think most of us would confidently say that library provision is more rich than it was a decade ago, that we offer more information sources that are more current, but it feels to me like they are more scattered, and that our users need a higher level of information fluency to make the best use of them. Now, undoubtedly, our users will often need assistance to make best use of these resources. And I think it's another challenge that for myself, I'm not sure how successful we are, for them to know that it's one of our core purposes as library to be helping them, and that they should always feel confident to ask us for help in accessing those electronic resources. My feeling as a result is that, are we relevant, is that well-qualified library staff are more important than they have ever been in the modern complex information landscape. Next slide, Andy.
Interesting what you're saying there, Rob, that it's more complex, people need more guidance, and that's something that could be challenging, of course, as more and more kids want to use the library. I'd really like to know people's views about what subscriptions you're doing, what is the good free stuff, and if you've got any comments about what Rob's saying is in terms of the guidance that kids need as these systems become more complex and perhaps even more scattered. So do put that in the chat, because we've got time for some discussion and some sharing at the end, and it would be great to have your views on this as well. Back to you, Rob.
Thanks, Andy. So here, thinking about how subscriptions have impacted our budgets, and when I'm looking at purchasing any subscription source, because staff are asking continuously for more and more and more subscriptions, I always ask them, and I ask myself and my library staff, is there a free option that will suffice here? And working with this thought, I think we can make both pragmatic and creative decisions. But now, I do think libraries need proportionally bigger budgets to meet the expectations of the school. I mean, back in 2010, subscriptions were a tiny component of the library budget here at Alice Smith School. Whereas in 2024, we haven't changed the budget very much for hard copy subscriptions since then, but subscriptions are now more than 50% of library budget, which means that our subscriptions have more than doubled in the last 14 years.
That's a really radical change, isn't it, Rob? I mean, 50% of your library budget on subscriptions, and I would say that that's a real key number there. And I would suggest that people should know exactly what percentage of your library budget is being spent on subscriptions. If it's around 50%, well, seems to be in line with what Rob's saying. If it's much less or much more, it might tell you a little bit about the balance of your collection. So just hang on to that number, the percentage of your spending on subscriptions, I think could be of key importance. Sorry to jump in there, Rob.
Not at all, Andy.
Carry on.
And I mean, when it comes to this budgetary stuff, I think there's also a danger that we are more at the mercy of the corporate world than we've ever been, or we were previously. And I've noticed an effect, like since COVID, I think there have been some really aggressive price hiking. And my advice, and I do think that, I am not scared. Don't be scared to negotiate. Whenever I see things being pushed up by more than sort of CPI amounts, I go to the providers and say, come on, let's talk about this. And I've really had very considerable success in pushing those price hikes back down into a reasonable zone. Next slide, Andy. Now, what about managing library subscriptions? Should the library manage all subscriptions? And just like the decision as to whether the library should manage the school's textbook collection, my feeling is that if your library has the capacity in terms of staff, then taking on all information-based subscriptions has huge benefits for your school. If we're controlling them, the subscriptions crash and fail much less often, even with us. That's sometimes a challenge. It allows the library to easily consolidate access from the library website. And it means that where auto authentication for single sign-on is not possible, that the library, as they're making the subscriptions, can keep a consistency in the log-on criteria. So I would say do it. So for me, subscription, and I'm coming to an end here. So for me, subscriptions are such an important aspect of modern libraries. But you know, I think it's time to hand over. So I'll pass over to Sally to think more about ebooks and audiobooks as a component of subscriptions.
I'm getting a bit of a reaction, Rob, about wider subscription management and whether people, you know, think that they should be involved or might be involved in wider subscription management. And it might be interesting to find out exactly how many people that we've got with us do get involved with managing subscriptions across the whole of the school provision. And I'm just going to launch this little poll here, if you don't mind. Which is going to be quite interesting, I think. Does your library or your librarians, you, manage information systems on a wider scale? Okay, just have a look at that. First answer, this is not...
You mean library subscriptions?
Yeah. Sorry, Rob, say that again?
So does your library manage library information subscriptions on a wider scale?
On a wider scale. So we manage some subscriptions, but not the process. But the process is not central. We manage the majority of information subscriptions. And Sally, you put in the chat there that, in your experience, it leads to better management and better value for money if it's centrally organised and centrally managed by people who know what they're doing. So I think. We're in agreement, but I'd really be interested in what people say in the chat about this. Is this part of a librarian's job to get involved in this kind of wider subscription management? I'm going to end the poll there. No, it's a couple more coming in. Yeah, good. Keep them coming. And it looks as though, Rob and Sal, that people are getting more involved than the last time we did this. So there are the results, and we manage the majority of information subscriptions is coming out as the majority answer. Yeah, okay. Something that everyone to think about, and it gives you, I think, it gives you much more influence as a librarian, doesn't it? If you manage the subscriptions and you show that the library is doing a good job in managing the subscriptions, it brings that library to the centre of the school. Much more sort of holistically and practically. So interesting stuff. I'm going to move on and hand over to Sal now and see where we go to with audiobooks and ebooks.
Thank you, Andy. Hi, good morning, everyone. Just thinking back to what you were just saying about the management of subscriptions, we were lucky enough that we were able to have like one librarian who was her, and it was her responsibility to keep a constant check on that we were doing that effectively, which is why on the bottom of my slide there I put and repeat, because I think the key thing with these kind of type of issues is it's ongoing. It's not something that you can do once and then get all about, because things are changing all the time. Anyway, so to get on with the part I wanted to talk about. Well, I was quite conscious that what I was saying would really help our network. I knew there would be a bit of overlap with what Rob had said. So what I thought I'd do was I would kind of look at it as if I was advising a new librarian. So forgive me if I'm sort of teaching grandma to suck eggs a little bit, is that the same? But I thought it would give us a sort of firm starting point to build from. And linked to what Rob was saying, the first thing that I probably would say to this imaginary new librarian is to make sure that they really do understand the historical and evolving landscape of audio and ebook usage. And Rob's just given us quite a lot of information about that. So if you're watching this webinar, you've got a head start, so that's great news. I think it's really important to see the trends in the industry, where they're going. But to make really informed decisions, I think it's also important to see you know, where we've come from. And it's interesting what you were saying about the audiobooks, because I think individually outside of the library, there's been a huge increase in audiobook usage over the past 7 or 8 years. But the problem is within school, as Rob was saying, they're expensive. And I think that school libraries have lagged behind probably because of that reason in providing a lot of audiobooks. Actually, thinking about what you were saying, Rob, it made me nostalgic for those CDs. Some of you will remember the old playaways on the shelves in the library. And to be honest, even back in the day, I think students kind of thought that they were perhaps part of a museum artifact or something, when it was only a few of our secondary students, at least, that, you know, a few hardcore audiobook listeners that used the playaways in the end. Of course, now there's like so much choice, but as we're saying, it's downright expensive. And then just understanding sort of where we've come from, thinking about the ebooks for a moment. I bet lots of you will remember 7 or 8 years ago, you know, as a group of librarians, we'd be forever debating, is the ebook going to take over the print book? Well, of course it hasn't. And I think even then, really, it was probably old people. By old people, I mean kind of me, who would really love the ebook option. So, yeah, all those endless discussions about ebook versus print book. I'm wondering now if the same discussions will be occurring, whether ideally audiobooks will supersede written text in whatever form it might be. When I was preparing for this, I had a look online at the audiobooks market, and according to Grandview Research, it's projected to have an annual growth rate of 26.3% between 2023 and 2030. So, you know, it certainly seems to be big business. So let me think. Yeah, I know I don't want to harp on about this, but I do think it's so important to know where we've come from. And I think Rob mentioned 2019 and things changing. And I think it's probably worth mentioning that would be linked with the COVID pandemic. I've got this picture of everyone standing in their gardens, painting their sheds, painting their fences, because they couldn't get to work or they couldn't get into schools, and they'd have their headphones on listening to their subscriptions. And I think at that time also ebooks were, and any print text was also really kind of ramping up. And Rob's talked already about Press Reader and the importance of it, and BorrowBox. Audible as well would have been a key player at the time. So the problem with that, of course, is that the students weren't in school. So we really need to check that we're buying what they actually use and what they need. So I've said to my imaginary new librarian, you know, we need to understand the historical context. And I guess that brings me to my second piece of advice to them, which would be to comprehensively review all the existing subscriptions across the whole school. And if you're a head of library, ultimately, or you've got a small team, that's going to be your responsibility. And it sounds, Rob, with all your knowledge, you've done that extremely effectively. So, yeah, we link to that kind of review of existing subscriptions across schools is that whole concept of who needs to manage that. And we've looked at that. My view is it's the library's job, basically. It's a view that sometimes gave me massive headache, and it would drive me crazy because it's huge. But as I say, we were lucky enough to have one team member specifically really focused on doing that. So when we've reviewed everything, then we need to make those decisions about what to keep to meet the requirements that we've got now. So, for example, just because Mr. Smith once looked at a motorbike magazine back in 1892, we shouldn't keep those subscriptions. We need to make sure that we're spending our budget well and we're meeting our user requirements. So maybe that's what I would say next to our librarian. So how to do that? Well, we really need to aim that we're being accessible and that we're inclusive. And I think sometimes it's kind of, we can assume that, particularly if we're well down the way, but if we're starting out, It's not always that straightforward. So we need to be making sure that the subscriptions we purchase have tailored content and appropriately leveled text, just like we would with print books. We need to have inclusive representation from marginalized and diverse communities. And we also, because it is a subscription, something we might be listening to, need to have adjustable playback speeds. We need to have the option of text highlighting and compatibility with assistive technologies. They're all essential to really make sure that individuals with diverse or additional learning needs can access them. Another, it's a small point, but something to think about is the length of loans and returns, especially if you're purchasing subscriptions for textbooks or set class readers. It needs to be flexible what you're buying. You don't want to suddenly have to return it. And as I think Rob touched on already with Press Reader, the accessibility of getting text in different languages. Also, obviously, we need to be thinking about the different age groups as well, and how easily it can work with the library server that you're using. So lots to be thinking about. Rob talked about BorrowBox, and the what's the word? Consortium, did you say? With other schools. That I think that's a great idea. I know some schools in Pasna in Bangkok are using the same thing. I think Libby is another tool that people often use when they're sharing the purchase of these subscriptions. I'm just getting myself in a little bit of a muddle.
That's really interesting though, Sal. I'm picking up two really important things that you said and that Rob have said. I mean, I'm really not surprised at the growth of audiobooks projected into the future, but the scale of it is really quite interesting. I think you said 26%. The whole thing is going to grow by 26% in the next 5 or 6 years. I think that's really significant. And that's something I think we should be keeping track of. And is your library keeping up with this trend of availability of the audiobooks as that market becomes more important? But the second thing that Rob was saying earlier on is the sheer cost of these audiobooks, and buying individual titles for online use as an audiobook is massively, massively expensive compared with other formats. And therefore, what you were talking about, Sal, and Rob was talking about, is the formation of these groups in cities that are sharing the cost of these audiobooks. So what I'm picking up, Sal, you were saying that this is happening in Bangkok, that groups of schools are coming together to share the cost of these audiobooks. And Rob, you were saying exactly the same thing about Kuala Lumpur, that massive savings are being made and giving great access to audiobooks because these consortiums or groups of schools are acting together rather than as individual schools. Did I get that right, Rob? Is that what's happening?
Sorry, just unmuting myself. Yeah, absolutely. And the same thing has happened in Singapore, and that they've created a massive consortium. I'm not sure of the numbers, but I think it's could well be 20 Singapore schools all in the same consortium with BorrowBox to do exactly this.
Interesting. Sal, say.
And what's interesting in the UK really is with public libraries usually have BorrowBox, so it's almost something that school libraries don't have to spend their money on because it's free access to anyone who signs up to a regular public library. So that's a kind of different way of looking at it as well. So I can see how in international schools, the spending requirement in that area, perhaps that area alone, I don't know, is
that's interesting though, Sal, that developing the relationship with your local municipal library or your public library, I can imagine in a city like Singapore or Hong Kong, that could be really interesting to be able to do that. Let's just take a quick poll there about how many people are actually involved in this sharing subscriptions with other schools. Are you doing it? Is this something that has hit your table and you're actively involved in it? So yes, our school currently uses such services. You're sharing subscriptions with other schools. No, but I would like to use such services. No, and I'm not interested. No, but I think the school's policy might make it difficult. Let's just see what people are saying there. There seems to be quite a spread that some people are getting involved in these shared subscriptions with other schools, but also significantly, Rob and Sal, I'm going to end the poll there and share the results. As we can see, that answer at the bottom, no, but I would like to, although the school's policy may make it difficult for us. So that's something that's interesting. And I think in terms of the importance, the increasing importance of audiobooks coming in the future and the price of them, finding out how you can share together and talking about it with your colleagues in other schools could be really important. Yeah, Sal.
Definitely. That last point is really it's just kind of important when you think about our library network generally, because as a group of people, we're all here, you know, to help one another and to support one another, share ideas and so on. And it's a shame, isn't it, if sort of school leadership doesn't make that possible because the schools are sort of seen as an island by themselves. So that's an interesting thing to reflect.
That can be a problem. It might be something else. We don't know. It hasn't sort of been part of the way the school does things. But I go back to that statistic. The importance, the increasing importance of audiobooks, 26% growth, and the cost of them, if the policy or the approach of the school makes this difficult, I think if you take, now I'm speaking as a former principal here, if you take that kind of evidence to school leaders and say, look, this is a trend, our kids have really got to become part of it, and it's difficult for us because of the cost. If we can get sharing together, we actually might be able to keep up, even though our budget is quite restricted. And I think that's something to be thinking about. So hold on to those stats that Rob and Sal have given you, because they're really important and they help when you're in discussion with your senior leadership team about your budgets. And Rob and Sal are both encouraging you to go out there and pitch for the library.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because that point at the beginning, right at the beginning of this webinar, libraries should be at the center. We believe that libraries should be at the center of any school. And you know, this is the sort of thing that puts them there. Sal, thanks very much. We're going to move on and to some questions, some comments and so on. And we had a really interesting comment there from Putu Irene. You commented, Irene, about the use of Britannica in your library. Could you tell us a little bit about that and what your library is, where it is, and how Encyclopedia Britannica is being used online as a subscription in your library? Could you comment on that? Don't know if Irene is still there. Perhaps you're still muted, Irene. Maybe not. Okay, let's move on. One of the things that I think that's very, very important when you're negotiating is that you can demonstrate that you need more of some of this, whatever the resource is, because it's being well used. Rob, could you tell us a little bit about how you go about monitoring your collection and how it's being used so that you can make a strong case for asking for more?
Yeah, I mean, you ask that, and you make me worry how effective I am at looking at the usage statistics, because we have so many subscriptions. I do once or twice a year ask the library staff and my lead library staff who manages our subscriptions to actually give me a report on usage, but I think you get a good feeling from the departments, because whenever we come to budget bidding, I always send them an email asking them to confirm that they need it renewing this coming year, and that it will not be renewed if they don't feedback. And then nearly always they get back and they're saying, this is so important to us. I mean, if you take the likes of The Economist or Institute of Physics, those things, people always say, I want them.
Yeah. I think I found also, as soon as you kind of suggest to a department, this is where I'm kind of have this slight, I think it helps for us to manage the subscriptions, but sometimes if the department are paying for them out of their own budget, then they really will check that they're used effectively, because we know they need them. So when Rob said he had lit charts, I mean, as an ex-English teacher, I was jumping for joy, because it's just the best subscription in the world, in my opinion.
And talking about good subscriptions, we're getting some comments coming in now. Nata, can I ask you to talk about your favorite subscriptions and the use of Britannica at your school, if you could? That would be really interesting. Can you tell us first what school you're at, and a little bit more about your library, and how the kids and indeed the staff might be using your subscriptions? Nata, can you comment on that? Is Nata there? Are you there, Nata?
I think Nata is here, just maybe either mute or shy.
Because I'm really interested. Is that JSTOR? JSTOR? Is that how you pronounce it? Have I got that pronunciation right?
Yes, it's JSTOR. It's a large academic database.
So when you say it's a large academic, because I was going to ask you about databases, Rob. I mean, what would be in JSTOR? What should people know about?
JSTOR is primarily a repository of academic research papers, but it does actually have a large collection of ebooks and other sources as well. And I can't. Is it JSTOR? I think, although we don't subscribe to it, I think there is an images facility in JSTOR, but that's not something that we've subscribed to. But for us, JSTOR is potentially probably our best value for money database subscription.
Value for money, that's what you want to get. You want to take on the stuff that kids and teachers want to read, and teachers want the kids to read. So that's something that I think is very important to know about. And one final question that I've got, perhaps I can put this to you, Sal, is this, before we wrap up, is this, how do you find out more about the latest subscriptions that are going on? Do you send out sort of questionnaires to teachers? How do you ask them? Do you sort of stop them in the corridor? Do you just have a chat in the staff room? How do you find out what's coming, what's trending, what's useful? How do you keep your finger on the pulse, Sal?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say all of the suggestions you've just made, and also like formally putting it as an agenda item going into the meeting to make sure it doesn't get missed. Can I just say something about JSTOR, because you've got me excited about it? I was just thinking, one of the problems we had with JSTOR was having it accessible both at home and in schools, which we did solve that problem. But it just reminded me of the importance of, when you're kind of setting up your subscriptions, making sure that they are accessible, ideally cross devices, and it's not too much of an ordeal for the kids to click on it and get logged in. Because as soon as, they've got to go through the hoops to do it, probably can't be bothered. You know what? Yeah. Maybe that's just the students. Some of the students I've known, not all of them, don't want to generalize, but you know what I mean? It needs to be, I'm the same, really. Sort of easy access,
easy login, which is what Rob was talking about, and that's one of the things that he was most interested in when he was signing up to subscription, that it's just easy to log into. You can just set it up and people can get in and use it easily. Sal, you made a really good point, I think, just now about when you're trying to find things out, and when you're trying to influence the school and bringing the library to the foreground. And it's this: don't be afraid to get items onto relevant agendas for meetings, whether it's whole school staff meetings, whether it's departmental meetings, whether it's the primary school meetings or a year leaders meeting. Be persistent in asking to speak at those different meetings. Be a presence at those meetings and get your items on the agenda.
Absolutely.
Perhaps it just raises the profile. Would you agree, Rob, that that's a good thing to be doing?
I mean, the whole advocacy side of library is huge. If we don't know how to bid out into the system, we're always going to be sort of, you know, back playing second fiddle.
Yeah, so important to invite yourself to the party.
I love that, Sal. So important to invite yourself to the party. And you are really, as librarians, in my view, part of that team, because without you serving the modern foreign linguists, the scientists, the mathematicians, be available, be visible, be helpful in individual meetings around the school, as well as your own meetings and as well as the staff meetings. Be a presence, being a helpful presence. If you're there, you can make comments that wouldn't otherwise have been made, because in my view, librarians see things from a very special perspective, and they need to be more heard across the whole school in a variety of different situations than they are. We've got a question coming in from Kieran there. What happens with licenses when you share subscriptions with other schools? That's a really good question, Kieran. Rob, can you pick that one up?
Yeah, I mean, for that one, if when you're forming a consortium, you're of course in negotiation with the provider. So the provider is going to decide what works in terms of license. We thought when we were setting up the BorrowBox consortium that we would be able to make a consortium across Singapore and Malaysia, because we thought the usage rights would be the same, but actually, you know, but they're not, and therefore BorrowBox said sorry, but we can't. So we had to form two separate consortiums, one for Singapore and one for Malaysia.
Okay, but it's still, the consortiums were set up, and one for Malaysia, one for Singapore. And Rob, it sounds like to me you were getting really much better value from this as a result, so it was worthwhile doing.
It's made a huge difference. Yeah,
a huge difference. I can imagine if you're somewhere like Bahrain. I know we've got people from St. Christopher's in Bahrain here. Bahrain, that could be really important in a city like Bahrain, Dubai, Abu Dhabi. So I've worked in the Middle East and I know how things work in those areas. And it would be fantastic if you were able to think about doing this with your colleagues in other libraries. And maybe, just maybe, we can play a part in doing this and helping people do this. We've got another comment coming in from Nata again. She just says, Britannica subscription is requested by the humanities teachers team in our school and is used mostly by primary and middle year students.
Yeah.
Interesting. We have JSTOR secondary sources subscription, and it is used mostly by IB diploma program students, but they're extended essays and researchers. Also, teachers use it a lot. So, Nata, thank you for that. And that just shows you how by monitoring this, you can get the usage, and then that helps you improve your provision again.
Can I just say really quickly, just to jump on the BorrowBox thing, I think it's an absolutely wonderful resource, but it's not yet available worldwide. It's in the Netherlands, it's in Singapore, Malaysia, some parts of the USA, Australia, New Zealand, UK, it's there. But quite an interesting alternative to that is that I'd love to know more about from other people, really, is the Libby option, which I think is kind of stemmed from Overdrive. And I think that is available worldwide. So that's something I'd kind of love to learn more about from everyone else, and then we could collate that information.
Absolutely. And if you would like to, anyone would like to write to admin@conciliumeducation.com with your comments and your ideas, that's the address that we use to send out the reminders about these sessions. We would love to hear you about that. Kieran's come back to us again in the chat box. We have problems with what material is allowed in one country and another in the Middle East. That does look tricky, and I can imagine that. Having just been involved with assisting a new school to set up in Bahrain, I know all the hoops that you have to jump through in order to get a book approved in Bahrain. So I can think that is an issue. I'm wondering, though, if you're within one jurisdiction, say Dubai, for example, you should be able to, I think, come to a consensus locally about what is available and what is allowed in Dubai. And the advice there I would have is talk to each other, see what you want, see how you can develop this, and then go to the regulator. So in Dubai, you've got a really active regulator with the KHDA, and they can be extremely helpful as well as being responsible for all those inspections. And that might be a way to do that. So, and Rob's smiling there because he's been through a couple of inspections with me in Dubai. And that could be interesting. I'm going to move us on because we've been going on for well over an hour now, which is fantastic. Thank you very much for that. We're putting together now ideas for next year. We have done BISLN as a free subscription for the whole year. We've done a series of 3 webinars, and we've had a lot of interesting interaction with people by email and in the webinars themselves. We're looking at next year taking BISLN as a low-cost subscription. We want to keep the cost down because we know that small schools in particular need probably as much help, if not more help, than anybody else. So we really are wanting to take that forward. We've got some ideas about, best ideas about free stuff, ebooks, audio books. We're fascinated by the idea that the role that libraries play in promoting well-being. And the well-being movement is just so important at the moment. If libraries are involved with that, it's going to continue placing you at the center of it. Supporting research. I've learned quite a lot today about JSTOR and what that does. So supporting research for your extended project qualification or extended essay, what the library can offer there. And there's this whole area of AI and coursework. One of the big ones I think that Rob will be doing next year is how to develop a balanced school library collection. So with Sal sort of leading the charge on libraries, well-being, community, and the sort of way that a library can evolve to touch the life of the school, and with Rob looking at the technical side of things and the backup to that, we are really looking forward to presenting these seminars in the future. So look out for our emails. It will come from admin@conciliumeducation.com, and we'll be sending them out in May and June about how your school can continue to join in with these webinars and to be involved with what we think is going to be an important network. We've got over 130 librarians signed up with BISLN at the moment, all around the world, and there's an opportunity in itself to talk to people and to be part of what they're doing in Peru or Ecuador or Mexico or the United States or Canada, because we've got members in all those territories, and we talk to them as a Western Hemisphere group in a different timescale. time area. Just one last word from Rob, one last word from Sal, and then we're going to sign off. Rob.
Andy, all I would say is it's been a pleasure to talk to you about subscriptions, and I hope that I'm sure you're all involved in subscriptions. I just hope that you've learned one or two useful things today.
Thanks very much, Rob. Sal.
Hi, yeah. First of all, thanks, Rob, and thanks to you, Andy. I would reiterate what you both said, and just really urge that you do get in touch. Do keep in touch, because I think one of the key things we want to do is get chatting more, and share our knowledge between us all.
Thanks very much, Sal. It's interesting the way I tend to look at it, because I'm not a librarian. I'm a former school principal, and just, I know that some of the tips that Rob and Sal are passing on about how to press buttons in terms of to move things on in the library's interest in senior leadership team meetings and in staff meetings and so on. So listen to these guys. They've got a lot to say, and listen to each other. Thanks, Sal, and thank you, everyone. We hope you've enjoyed the discussion. Rob and Sal have produced a useful set of links to follow up their presentations, which are all available through the BISLN members area. Thank you very much indeed, and see you next time.